I stood in attorney Harold Pierce's office, and my daughter-in-law Dorothy just went pale. She was gripping her designer handbag so hard her knuckles turned white, and her boyfriend Stephen was shifting uncomfortably in his $1,000 suit. They thought this reading would make them millionaires. They had no idea what was coming. 3 months ago, Dorothy threw me out of my own son's house, the day we buried him. She called me a parasite. She told me I had no house, no savings, and no relevance. She made me sign away everything. But today, she was about to learn that Victor knew exactly who she was, and he made sure I'd be the one standing when the dust settled. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story has twists you won't believe. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Someone who was supposed to be family? Drop your answer in the comments, because you'll understand exactly how I felt. Now let me take you back to where this all began. I became a widow at 32 years old. My husband Daniel died in a construction accident when Victor was only 7. The settlement they gave me barely covered the funeral costs. I remember standing at Daniel's grave, holding Victor's small hand, wondering how I was going to survive, but I didn't have time to fall apart. I had a son who needed me. So I did what any mother would do. I worked. I took a job as a lunch lady at Victor's elementary school, so I could be near him during the day. Then I worked night shifts cleaning office buildings downtown. The fluorescent lights, the empty hallways, the smell of industrial cleaner, that became my second home. And on weekends, I baked cakes for neighbors. $25 a cake. I remember every single order. Birthday cakes, wedding cakes, anniversary cakes. I baked hope into every layer. Victor was brilliant, not just smart, brilliant. He used to draw buildings on every scrap of paper he could find. Skyscrapers, bridges, houses with impossible angles. He wanted to be an architect. But college? That was a fantasy for people like us. So I worked harder. I picked up a third job at a nursing home, feeding elderly residents who reminded me of my own mother. For 11 years, I worked 3 jobs. 11 years. Victor never wore hand-me-downs. He never missed a field trip. He never went to bed hungry. He got a full ride to State University for architecture. I cried the day that acceptance letter came, but the scholarship didn't cover everything. He needed money for room and board, for books, for a laptop he desperately needed for his design classes. I looked at my wedding ring one night, the small diamond Daniel had saved 6 months to buy. I took it off, went to a pawn shop downtown, and sold it for $800. When Victor asked where it was, I told him I lost it while doing dishes. He found out the truth years later. He cried. By then, he had his degree. He had his career. He had everything I dreamed he would have. Victor graduated top of his class and landed a job at a prestigious architecture firm. I thought I'd done enough. I thought I could finally rest. I was wrong. Victor met Dorothy 6 years ago at a firm event. She was a receptionist there. Beautiful, charming, always dressed like she came from money. She didn't. But she was very good at pretending. I tried to like her, I really did. But there were signs right from the start. She corrected Victor's grammar in front of people, like he was a child who didn't know better. She talked about his salary as if it was hers, like planning vacations and renovations for an apartment she didn't even live in yet. I'll never forget the Christmas I gave her a hand-knit scarf. I'd spent weeks on it, every stitch made with care. She opened the box, looked at it, and 2 days later, she returned it to me. She said, "Nora, I only wear cashmere." The smile on her face was so cold it made my blood freeze. When they got married, she told me my dress clashed with the aesthetic. I wasn't in any of the wedding photos, not one. But Victor loved her. And I loved Victor. So I kept my mouth shut. 2 years ago, Victor told me he wanted to buy a house. He'd been saving for years and had $40,000 for a down payment. His eyes lit up when he talked about it. A real home, a backyard, maybe room for kids one day. It was all he'd ever wanted. Then Dorothy's father got sick. Cancer, they said. They needed money fast for treatment. Victor was devastated. His dream was slipping away, and the man he thought was his father-in-law was dying. I'd been saving for 10 years, $40,000 in a savings account. Every penny I'd scraped together from those 3 jobs, from the cakes, from the overtime shifts, It was my retirement, my safety net, my everything. I gave it to Victor. All of it. I told him it was a gift. He cried. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He said, "I'll pay you back, I promise. I'll put your name on the deed. You'll always have a home with us." Dorothy was standing right there. She smiled and said, "That's so generous, Nora." But her eyes were cold. So cold. The house closed a month later. A beautiful 3-bedroom home on Maple Street with a front porch and a maple tree in the yard. Victor's dream home. My name never made it onto the deed. Victor kept saying he'd fix it. There was always a reason it wasn't the right time. The paperwork was complicated. They'd do it next month. After the holidays, after tax season. I didn't push. He was my son. I trusted him. I should have known better. Victor trusted Dorothy. And that trust was going to destroy everything. Victor collapsed at work on a Tuesday morning. He was 46 years old. A massive heart attack. He was dead before the ambulance even arrived. I got the call from Dorothy. She was crying, or pretending to cry, I couldn't tell anymore. She said, "Nora, you need to come to the hospital. It's Victor, please hurry." I ran. I don't even remember the drive. By the time I got there, he was gone. They let me see him. I held his hand. It was already cold. I kept thinking about the day he was born, how tiny his fingers were, how he'd grabbed onto mine and wouldn't let go. 46 years later, and I was the one who couldn't let go. I sat there holding his cold hand, and I didn't know how I was supposed to keep breathing. The funeral was 3 days later. I paid for it. $12,000. Dorothy said she'd reimburse me. She never did. After the service, everyone came back to the house. My money. Victor's dream. Dorothy's kingdom. I was in the kitchen making coffee for the guests when Dorothy walked in. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Tall, slicked back hair, expensive cologne that filled the room. He had his hand on her lower back, familiar, comfortable, like he'd been there before. My son had been dead for 72 hours. Dorothy looked at me and said, "Nora, we need to talk." I followed her into Victor's study. The man, I'd later learn his name was Stephen, stayed in the doorway like a bouncer at a club. Dorothy sat down in Victor's chair, his chair. She folded her hands on his desk like a CEO about to fire someone. She said, "I need you to move out." I stared at her. The words didn't make sense. "Excuse me? This is my house now. Victor's gone. I'm moving on with my life, and I can't do that with you here hovering like some grief-stricken ghost." "Dorothy, I put $40,000 into this house." She leaned back and smiled. "Did you, though? Because I don't see your name on the deed, and neither will a judge." My heart stopped. "My son just died." "And my husband just died," she snapped. "So let's not play the grief Olympics, Nora. You're not on the deed, you're not on the mortgage. Legally, you're a guest, and I'm asking you to leave." I couldn't breathe. "You can't be serious." "I'm having the locks changed tomorrow. You have until noon to pack your things." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Sign this. It says you have no claim to this property." "I'm not signing that." Stephen stepped into the room. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He just stood there, filling the doorway, making it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. But I signed it. What choice did I have? Dorothy took the paper, folded it, and tucked it into her purse. Then she looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "One more thing. Don't come crying to me about how you sacrificed everything for Victor. You chose to be a martyr. That's on you. Now, you're a 68-year-old woman with no house, no savings, and no relevance. Maybe you should have thought about that before you gave away your future." She called me a parasite. She said I'd sucked Victor dry his whole life. That I'd guilted him into giving me money. That he resented me. Every word was a knife. But here's what Dorothy didn't know. While she was busy destroying me, I was recording every single word on my phone. If you're feeling what I felt in that moment, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is something Dorothy never saw coming. Trust me. You don't want to miss this. I spent that night at the Roadway Motel off Route 9. $49 a night. The bedspread smelled like cigarettes and sadness. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried until I had nothing left. My son was gone. My home was gone. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, it was all gone. I started going through Victor's things. It was all I'd been allowed to take. His watch, a photo album, a box of his childhood drawings, buildings and bridges he'd sketched when he was just a boy. At the bottom of the box, I found an envelope. My name was written on it in Victor's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a small silver key and a business card. Harold Pierce, attorney at law. On the back of the card, Victor had written, "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Use the key. Call Harold. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I love you." I didn't understand. What key? What was he apologizing for? What did he know? I called Harold the next morning. My voice was shaking. I said, "This is Nora Rose. I'm Victor Alexander's mother. He left me your card." There was a pause. Then Harold said, "Mrs. Nora, I've been waiting for your call. Your son left very specific instructions. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? I said yes. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at that silver key, wondering what my son had left behind. Wondering if he'd known. Wondering if somehow, even from the grave, Victor was trying to protect me. Here's my question for you. Have you ever discovered something after losing someone that completely changed how you saw everything? Let me know in the comments, because that's exactly what was about to happen to me. Harold Pierce's office was nothing fancy. Small building on the corner of 5th and Main, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. Modest furniture that had seen better days. But when I walked through that door, Harold was waiting for me, like he'd been expecting me his whole life. He was in his 60s, with gray hair that looked like it had gone white from seeing too many family tragedies. But his eyes were the kindest I'd ever seen. The moment he saw me, he stood up and extended his hand. "Mrs. Nora," he said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Victor spoke about you constantly. That's what broke me. Not the funeral, not Dorothy's cruelty, but those simple words. Victor had talked about me. Even in his last months when his world was falling apart, he'd been thinking about me." I started crying right there in his office. Big, ugly sobs that I couldn't control. Harold didn't rush me. He didn't look uncomfortable. He just handed me a box of tissues and sat quietly until I could breathe again. When I finally composed myself, he said, "Your son was one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met. He came to me with a very specific plan. He wanted to make sure you'd be protected, no matter what happened." He handed me a folder, thick, heavy, full of documents I didn't understand. "This is for you," he said. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, legal documents, emails, page after page of things that didn't make sense to me. Numbers, dates, names I didn't recognize. Harold sat down across from me and leaned forward. "Mrs. Nora, your son came to me 8 months ago." 8 months. Victor had been planning something for 8 months, and I'd had no idea. "He told me his marriage was ending," Harold continued carefully. "He'd discovered that Dorothy was having an affair with a man named Stephen Harris. It had been going on for over a year." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. "He knew?" "Yes. He hired a private investigator. The evidence was extensive." I thought about all those dinners I'd had with Victor in those last months, how tired he'd looked, how quiet. I'd thought it was just stress from work. I'd asked him if everything was okay. He'd smiled and said, "Just a tough project, Mom. Nothing to worry about." He'd been protecting me even then. Keeping me from worrying, carrying that pain alone. "He was planning to divorce her," Harold said. "But he didn't want to do anything until he'd made sure you were protected first. He told me, my mother gave up everything for me. I won't let Dorothy take what little she has left." I started crying again. Harold waited. "He knew exactly what kind of person she was," Harold continued. "He said he'd been blind to it for years, but once he started seeing it, he couldn't unsee it. The way she treated you, the way she talked about you when you weren't around. He was ashamed that he hadn't stood up for you sooner." "He didn't need to be ashamed," I whispered. "He was my son. I never expected." "He wanted to," Harold said firmly. "That's why he came to me." He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. "Victor set up a trust, a completely separate account that Dorothy knew nothing about. For months, he'd been carefully moving money into it. Not so much that she'd notice, but enough to build something substantial. The current balance is $873,000. I stared at the number. $873,000. I'd never seen that much money in my entire life. All those years of working 3 jobs, of saving every penny, and I'd never had more than 40,000 at once. I don't understand, I said. How did he have that much? Victor was very good at his job, Harold said. He'd gotten several bonuses over the years that Dorothy didn't know about. He had a separate account for work payments, and he'd been investing wisely. He told me he learned that from watching you. How you'd made every dollar stretch, how you'd saved for his future, even when you had nothing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. There's more, Harold said gently. He handed me another document. Victor bought a safety deposit box 6 months ago. That's what the silver key is for. He left very specific instructions with me. I was to give you the key only after his death, and only if Dorothy tried to remove you from the house. My breath caught. He knew she'd kick me out? He didn't just suspect it, Mrs. Nora, he knew. He told me, the day I die, Dorothy will start erasing me, and the first thing she'll erase is my mother. She'll kick her out before my body is cold. Those were his exact words. I couldn't breathe. My son had known, he'd seen it coming like a storm on the horizon, and he'd prepared for it. He wanted you to have evidence, Harold said. He wanted you to have proof that you weren't crazy, that you weren't imagining how cruel she was. He wanted you to have weapons. We went to the bank that afternoon. My legs barely carried me. The safety deposit box was in a vault, cold and quiet. I used the silver key with shaking hands. Inside was a large manila envelope. Harold helped me open it. The first thing I saw was a stack of printed emails. I started reading, and my stomach turned. They were messages between Dorothy and Stephen, dozens of them. They went back over a year, long before Victor had died. Messages talking about Victor's life insurance policy, how much it was worth, what they'd do with the money. One email from Dorothy read, "Just think, in a few years, we won't have to sneak around anymore. He works himself to death anyway. Probably won't make it to 50 with the hours he keeps." Stephen's response, "Better hope it's sooner rather than later. I'm getting tired of motels." I felt sick. There were text messages too. Printed out, dated, time-stamped. Dorothy joking about Victor dying young. "He's already got high blood pressure. Give it 5 years tops." Stephen sending laughing emojis in response. And then there was a recording. Harold had brought a small device to play it. He pressed play, and Dorothy's voice filled the small bank vault. "Once he's gone, it's all ours. The house, the insurance, everything. And the best part? His pathetic mother won't be able to do anything about it. She's got no legal claim to anything. I made sure of that." Stephen's voice, "What about the guilt? Won't you feel bad?" Dorothy laughed. "Guilty? For what? He's boring. He works all the time. He's a terrible husband. If anything, I'm doing him a favor by putting him out of his misery." I had to sit down. The room was spinning. Harold turned off the recording. "There's more, but you don't need to hear it all now." "When did he record this?" I asked. "About 5 months ago. He planted a recording device in his own study. He suspected they were meeting there when he was at work." My son had lived with this knowledge for months, knowing his wife was planning his erasure. Maybe not his murder. I don't think even Dorothy was that evil, but definitely his erasure. And mine. Harold pulled out one more document. This one looked official. Legal. Victor updated his will 2 weeks before he died. This is the most recent version. Dorothy doesn't know about it. She thinks the old will is still valid, the one that leaves everything to her as the surviving spouse. And the new one? She gets nothing, not a penny. The will explicitly states that she is to receive nothing due to proven infidelity and malicious intent. Everything. The trust, the house, his retirement accounts, his life insurance policy goes to you. Every single thing. I couldn't process it. Can she contest it? She can try, but Victor made this ironclad. He documented everything. He has proof of the affair. He has proof that she defrauded you out of your $40,000. He has recordings of her malicious statements. No judge in the country would side with her. I started crying again. But this time it wasn't from sadness, it was from rage. From relief. From overwhelming, devastating love for a son who had protected me even when he couldn't protect himself. Harold leaned forward and handed me another tissue. "The will reading is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Dorothy will be there. She'll expect to inherit everything. The house, the accounts, the insurance policy. She has no idea what's coming." He paused, studying my face. I need to know, Mrs. Nora. This is your choice. Do you want me to tell her privately to spare you the confrontation? Or do you want to be there when she finds out? I thought about Victor. I thought about all those years I worked 3 jobs. I thought about my wedding ring in a pawn shop. I thought about Dorothy's cold smile when I gave them my life savings. I thought about her calling me a parasite the day we buried my son. I looked Harold dead in the eye. I want to be there. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I stayed at that motel, sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. I read through every document Harold had given me. Every email. Every text message. Every piece of evidence Victor had collected. My son had been so thorough, so careful. He'd thought of everything. On the morning of the will reading, I woke up at dawn. I showered in that dingy motel bathroom and put on the same black dress I'd worn to Victor's funeral. It felt appropriate, like I was mourning the man I thought my son had married, the life I thought he'd had. I arrived at Harold's office 15 minutes early. I wanted to be there first. I wanted to watch Dorothy walk in, confident and smug, thinking she was about to become a very wealthy woman. But when I got there, she was already in the waiting room. She'd brought Stephen. Of course she had. Dorothy was wearing a designer suit, probably bought with Victor's money. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a woman who had everything figured out. She glanced at me when I walked in. Her lip curled. "Surprised you showed up. Didn't think you'd have the money for bus fare." Stephen, sitting next to her with his arm casually draped over the back of her chair, smirked. I didn't say anything. I just sat down across from them and waited. Dorothy checked her watch. "How long is this going to take? I have a showing at 3. A showing? She was already selling Victor's house, the house I'd paid for. The house where my son had dreamed of raising children. Harold came out of his office. "Thank you all for coming. Please come in." We filed into his office. Dorothy and Stephen sat on one side. I sat on the other. Harold sat at his desk with a thick folder in front of him. "We're here for the reading of Victor Alexander's last will and testament," Harold began. His voice was formal now, professional. "This will was executed on March 15th, 2 weeks before Mr. Alexander's death, and supersedes all previous wills." Dorothy shifted in her seat. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, but it passed quickly. "Let's begin," Harold said. He opened the folder and started reading. "I, Victor Daniel Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." Dorothy was leaning back in her chair, that same smug smile on her face. Harold continued. "To my wife, Dorothy Lynn Alexander, I leave the following." Dorothy sat up straighter, ready to hear the list of everything she was about to inherit. Nothing. The word hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Dorothy laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "What?" "Nothing," Harold repeated, his voice calm and even. Quote, "My wife has shown through her actions and words that she values material wealth over human dignity. She has betrayed my trust, my love, and my faith in her character. I leave her nothing, as she left me nothing worth remembering." The smile vanished from Dorothy's face. Her skin went from tan to white to red in the span of seconds. "That's not legal," she said. Her voice was sharp now, cutting. "I'm his wife. I'm entitled to half of everything. That's the law." "Actually," Harold said calmly, "in cases of proven infidelity and fraud, a spouse can be completely disinherited. Victor was very thorough in documenting both." "This is insane," Dorothy shot to her feet. "Victor loved me. He couldn't." "Sit down, Mrs. Alexander," Harold said. It wasn't a request. Dorothy sat, but her whole body was trembling with rage. Harold continued reading. "To my mother, Nora Rose Alexander, who sacrificed everything so that I could have everything, who gave up her dreams so that I could live mine, who sold her most precious possessions so that I could have an education, I leave the following." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. "The entirety of my trust fund, currently valued at $873,000. My retirement accounts through Wagner and Associates, currently valued at $212,000. My life insurance policy valued at $500,000. And full ownership of the house located at 428 Maple Street, which my mother financed with her life savings, but was fraudulently excluded from the deed." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The numbers were swimming in front of my eyes. Additionally, Harold continued, I leave my mother my heartfelt apology for not protecting her sooner, for not seeing the truth about my marriage until it was almost too late, and for allowing someone who should have been family to treat her with such cruelty. Mom, you deserved better. You always deserved better. Tears were streaming down my face. Dorothy exploded. You're lying. This is a fake will. Victor would never. He loved me. He wouldn't leave me with nothing. Did he? Harold asked mildly. He pulled out a manila envelope. Because I have extensive documentation that suggests otherwise. Emails, for instance, where you called your husband boring, pathetic, and this is my personal favorite, a meal ticket with no expiration date. He slid several printed pages across the desk. Dorothy's eyes went wide as she recognized her own words. I also have text messages where you joked about him dying young. Bank statements showing you drained his personal account without his knowledge. And security footage from his office building showing you and Mr. Harris here entering his condo multiple times while he was at work. Stephen had gone pale. He was staring at the desk like he wished he could disappear into it. Dorothy was shaking. Those are, you can't. I can, and I will, Harold said calmly. These documents will be presented to any court if you attempt to contest this will. I guarantee that no judge will side with you once they see evidence. I reached into my purse. My hands were steady now, calm. I also have something, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I pulled out my phone. Recordings. From the day of the funeral. Would you like to hear them? Dorothy's eyes went wide. You wouldn't. I pressed play. Dorothy's voice filled the office, cold and cruel and unmistakable. You chose to be a martyr. That's on you. Now, you're a 68-year-old woman with no house, no savings, and no relevance. Maybe you should have thought about that before you gave away your future. Her voice continued. Don't come crying to me about how you sacrificed everything for Victor. You're a parasite. You sucked him dry his whole life. The recording ended. The silence in the room was deafening. Stephen stood up abruptly. I think we should go. Sit down, Harold said. His voice was sharp now, commanding. We're not finished. Stephen sat. Harold looked at Dorothy. Her face was the color of old milk. Victor also left a letter, he said. He gave me very specific instructions. If you attempted to contest this will, which I'm certain you will, he wanted me to read this letter aloud, in front of witnesses. Don't you dare, Dorothy started. Harold unfolded the letter. These are your husband's final words to you. And then he began to read. Victor's words. My son's voice, speaking from beyond the grave. Dorothy, if you're hearing this letter, it means you did exactly what I thought you would do. You threw my mother out of the house. You erased her from my life the second I was gone. You probably brought Stephen to the funeral. You've probably already started selling my things, planning your new life. Harold's voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling slightly. I knew you would. I've known who you really are for a long time now, longer than you think. Dorothy made a choking sound. I loved you once, or at least, I thought I did. Maybe I still do in some broken, desperate way. Maybe that's why I stayed as long as I did. But love isn't enough when the person you love is fundamentally incapable of loving you back. Love isn't enough when every kind word is a manipulation. When every touch is a transaction. When every smile hides contempt. The words cut through the room like knives. I found the emails, Dorothy. I heard the voicemails. I know about Stephen. I've known for 14 months. I hired a private investigator. I have photos, dates, times, hotel receipts. I have everything. Dorothy was trembling now, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. I stayed because I was weak, because I didn't want to admit I'd made a catastrophic mistake, because some pathetic part of me kept thinking you'd change, that you'd wake up one day and remember how to be human. Harold paused, letting the words sink in. You won't change. People like you don't. You'll always see kindness as weakness. You'll always see generosity as stupidity. You'll always take and take and take until there's nothing left. I closed my eyes. This was my son's pain laid bare. My mother gave me everything. Do you understand that? Everything. She worked herself to exhaustion so I could have a future. She took jobs she hated so I could have clothes that fit and food that wasn't expired. She worked 3 jobs for 11 years so I wouldn't have to know what it felt like to be poor. Harold's voice grew stronger. She sold her wedding ring, the only thing she had left from my father, so I could afford textbooks for college. She lied and told me she'd lost it. I didn't find out the truth until years later, and when I did, I cried for 2 hours. Do you know what she said when I asked her why? She said, "Because your future was more valuable than my past." Tears were streaming down my face. I'd forgotten Victor knew that story. I thought I'd hidden it well enough. She gave me $40,000, her entire retirement, everything she'd saved for 10 years, so I could buy a house. Our house. The house you're probably planning to sell right now. She gave it freely, without hesitation, because that's what real love looks like. And I promised her I'd put her name on the deed. I promised I'd take care of her the way she'd taken care of me. Harold looked up at Dorothy. Her face was streaked with angry tears. But I didn't. I let you convince me to wait, to put it off. I let you make excuses about paperwork and timing and fees. I was so stupid. I thought we had time. I thought I could fix it later. The letter continued. I failed my mother while I was alive. I won't fail her in death. The house is hers. It was always hers. Every brick was paid for with her sacrifice. The money is hers. The accounts are hers. The life insurance is hers. Everything is hers, because everything I ever had came from her. Dorothy let out a sob. But it wasn't sadness. It was rage. You get nothing, Dorothy. Not because I want revenge. Not because I'm trying to hurt you, but because you don't deserve anything that came from love. You don't deserve anything that came from sacrifice. You only understand transactions, so here's your final one. You gave me nothing worth remembering, so I leave you nothing worth keeping. Harold's voice dropped lower. I hope it was worth it. I hope Stephen makes you happy. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in life, but you won't find it in my legacy. You won't find it in my mother's pain, and you won't find it in my memory. Goodbye, Dorothy. I wish I'd said it sooner. Harold folded the letter. The silence in the room was crushing. Dorothy was shaking so hard the chair was rattling. He was planning to leave me? He filed for divorce the day before he died, Harold said quietly. The papers were drafted. He would have been served the following week. Dorothy turned to look at me. Her eyes were wild, desperate, filled with a rage that made my blood run cold. You did this. You poisoned him against me. You manipulated him. You're a manipulative, pathetic. Be very careful what you say next, Harold warned. Mrs. Nora has grounds for multiple lawsuits if you continue to defame her character. Slander, emotional distress, fraud, the list goes on. Stephen grabbed Dorothy's arm. We need to leave. Now. Get off me. Dorothy shoved him away and turned back to Harold. You'll hear from my lawyer. This will isn't legal. I'll contest it. I'll tie this up in court for years. I look forward to it, Harold said calmly. I'll make sure every newspaper in the city has copies of those emails, every text message, every recording. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Dorothy grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Stephen followed, but he stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. For just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, and he left. The door slammed so hard the walls shook. The office fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner. I sat there, staring at my hands. They were folded in my lap, calm and still. But inside I was a hurricane. I felt hollow, victorious, devastated, relieved, guilty, grateful. All of it at once, swirling together until I couldn't tell one emotion from another. Mrs. Nora, Harold said gently. Are you all right? I looked up at him. I don't know, I whispered. I just got everything I thought I'd lost, everything Victor worked for. But I lost him, I lost my son, and no amount of money will bring him back. Harold nodded slowly. He loved you very much, more than anything. He wanted you to know that. He wanted you to be okay. That's why he did all of this. I know, I said, my voice broke. I know he did. Harold stood and walked around his desk. He handed me another tissue. Take all the time you need. I'll start the paperwork for transferring the accounts and the house deed. It will take a few weeks, but everything will be in your name. I nodded, unable to speak. One more thing, Harold said. Victor left a personal note for me to give you. He said to give it to you after the will reading, when you were alone. He handed me a small envelope. My name was written on it in Victor's handwriting. Just seeing it made my heart break all over again. I'll leave you alone, Harold said quietly, and then he stepped out of his office, closing the door behind him. I sat there for a long moment, holding that envelope. My son's last words to me. The final message he'd left behind. Finally, with shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. His handwriting. His words. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. I'm sorry I let Dorothy treat you the way she did. I'm sorry I didn't put your name on the deed like I promised. I'm sorry for so many things, but I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for having you as my mother. You gave me everything, not just things, but values. Work ethic, kindness, sacrifice. You showed me what real love looks like. I hope I showed you too, even if it was late. Even if it was in my last act instead of my daily life. The money, the house, it's not payment. You don't owe me anything, you never did. It's just me trying to give back a tiny fraction of what you gave me. Live, Mom. Really live. Not for me. Not for anyone else. For you. You deserve peace. You deserve rest. You deserve to wake up in the morning and not have to worry about bills or work or anyone who doesn't value you. You deserve to be happy. I love you. I've always loved you. And I'll love you from wherever I am now. Your son, Victor." I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest, and then, alone in that office, I let myself cry. For my son, for the life he should have had, for all the years of sacrifice that had led to this moment. But somewhere, beneath the grief, I felt something else. Something warm and unbreakable. Love, the kind of love that survives death, the kind of love that plans and protects from beyond the grave. The kind of love that says, I see you, I value you, you matter. Victor had given me that. And Dorothy would never, ever understand it. Because she'd never understood that love isn't about what you can take. It's about what you're willing to give. Dorothy didn't go quietly. The day after the will reading, she hired a lawyer. Some hotshot attorney from downtown with a fancy office and an even fancier hourly rate. She was convinced she could overturn Victor's will. She told everyone who would listen that I'd manipulated my son, that I'd poisoned his mind against her, that the will was fraudulent. Her lawyer requested all the documentation. Harold sent everything. Every email, every text message, every recording, every receipt, every photograph from the private investigator showing Dorothy and Stephen entering and leaving hotels. Everything. 3 days later, Dorothy's lawyer dropped her as a client. I heard about it through Harold. He called me at the motel where I was still staying and said, "Mrs. Nora, Dorothy's attorney just withdrew from the case. He told her there was no legal ground to contest the will, and that pursuing it would be, quote, professional suicide for any lawyer foolish enough to take it." I didn't feel victorious, I just felt tired. But Dorothy wasn't done. If the legal system wouldn't help her, she'd try the court of public opinion. She went to the media, started calling local news stations, local newspapers, anyone who would listen. She told them a sob story about how her evil mother-in-law had stolen her inheritance, how I'd manipulated my dying son, how I'd forged documents and bribed lawyers. She painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. One local news blog actually seemed interested. They were preparing to run a story, "Grieving Widow Loses Everything to Greedy Mother-in-Law." I saw the draft headline. My stomach turned. But then something interesting happened. Someone, I never found out who, leaked the recordings to that same news blog. Not just the recording I'd made at the funeral, but the ones Victor had made. Dorothy's voice, clear as crystal, talking about Victor's life insurance, joking about him dying young, calling him pathetic, planning her future with Stephen while her husband was still alive. The blog killed Dorothy's story and ran a different one instead. Woman caught planning husband's financial erasure on tape. It went viral. Within 24 hours, Dorothy's face was everywhere. Local news picked it up. Then regional news. Social media exploded. People were calling her every name in the book: heartless, gold digger, monster. The comment sections were brutal. If you're invested in seeing justice served, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened next proves that, sometimes, karma doesn't need any help. Within 48 hours, Dorothy went from anonymous to infamous. She couldn't go to the grocery store without people recognizing her. Someone posted her address online. People started leaving notes on her car. Nasty notes, threatening notes. Her employer called her in on a Friday afternoon. They'd seen the news coverage, they'd read the articles, they'd watched the recordings. The firm she worked for was a prestigious architecture company, the same one where she'd met Victor, where she'd worked as a receptionist for 6 years. They fired her for bringing negative attention to the firm and damaging its reputation. They had every right. Their clients were calling, asking why they employed someone who'd been caught on tape talking about her husband like he was a business transaction. Dorothy tried to spin it. She posted on social media that she was being persecuted, that people didn't know the whole story, that the recordings were taken out of context. But nobody believed her. How do you take "once he's gone, it's all ours" out of context? 2 weeks after the will reading, Stephen left her. I heard about it from Harold, who heard about it from someone at Victor's old firm. Apparently, Stephen had packed his things while Dorothy was out looking for a new job. He left a note. Just a note. Didn't even have the guts to tell her to her face. He moved to Florida. I heard later that he'd started dating a 24-year-old yoga instructor he'd met online. The photos showed up on social media. Stephen on a beach, tanned and smiling, with his arm around a woman half his age. Dorothy's friends sent her the pictures. Not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. People love watching someone fall from grace, especially when that person was cruel themselves. Dorothy was alone. No job, no husband, no boyfriend, no friends. The people who used to have lunch with her stopped returning her calls. The neighbors who used to smile and wave pretended they didn't see her. She'd become toxic, and nobody wanted to be associated with her. She tried to fight the will one more time. She hired another lawyer, a cheaper one this time, someone desperate enough to take a losing case. They filed motions, they requested hearings. They tried every legal maneuver they could think of. Every single one failed. The judge looked at the evidence and dismissed her case with prejudice, which Harold explained meant she could never try to contest the will again. The judge actually said, from the bench, "This court finds the evidence of fraud and infidelity to be overwhelming and disturbing. The deceased had every right to disinherit his spouse under these circumstances. Case dismissed. But the legal fees destroyed her." She'd paid the first lawyer thousands before he dropped her. The second lawyer wasn't cheap either. She'd taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, borrowed money from anyone who would lend it to her. 6 months after Victor's death, Dorothy declared bankruptcy. I found out from a public records search that Harold ran for me. He said, "Mrs. Nora, I thought you should know. Dorothy filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy last week. She's lost everything. The courts are liquidating whatever assets she has left." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. She'd tried to take everything from me, and now she had nothing. But another part of me just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that someone could be so consumed by greed and selfishness that they destroy their entire life. The last I heard about Dorothy was about a year after Victor's death. Someone who knew someone told Harold, and Harold told me. She was working retail at a strip mall about 30 miles outside the city. Some cheap clothing store where she folded shirts and helped customers find their sizes. Minimum wage. No benefits. The same woman who used to brag about only wearing cashmere was now selling polyester blends to teenagers. The same woman who returned my hand-knit scarf because it wasn't expensive enough was now living in a studio apartment she could barely afford. The same woman who looked at me with contempt and called me irrelevant was now exactly what she'd accused me of being. Broke, alone, and forgotten. I could have gloated. I could have driven to that strip mall and walked into her store, wearing nice clothes bought with Victor's money, just to show her how far I'd risen and how far she'd fallen. Some people told me I should. That she deserved to see me thriving. But I didn't, because that's not who I am. That's not who Victor raised me to be, and it's not who I raised him to be. Revenge doesn't heal anything. It doesn't bring back the people we've lost. It doesn't erase the pain. It just creates more pain, more bitterness, more emptiness. Dorothy had destroyed her own life. I didn't need to celebrate that. I didn't need to dance on the ashes of her choices. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. That was consequence enough. I chose to move forward instead. I took Victor's gift, because that's what it was, A gift, not revenge, not payment, but love transformed into security. And I built a new life. Not to prove anything to Dorothy, not to show her what she'd lost, but because my son had given me the chance to finally live for myself, and I wasn't going to waste it. Let me ask you something. When someone who wronged you falls on hard times, do you feel satisfaction or sadness? Comment below, because I genuinely struggled with this feeling. Part of me felt like Dorothy got what she deserved, but part of me just felt empty about the whole thing. Dorothy's fall wasn't satisfying the way I thought it might be. It was just sad. A sad ending to a sad story about a sad person who never learned that love isn't something you take, it's something you give. I never saw her again. I never went looking. I heard rumors sometimes, someone would mention seeing her, or hearing about her. But I never followed up. She'd taken up enough space in my life, she'd caused enough pain. I had a future to build. And unlike Dorothy, I wasn't going to waste it on bitterness. I'm 70 years old now. 2 years have passed since that will reading, since Dorothy's fall, since everything changed. I live in a small house near a lake about 40 miles outside the city. It's nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a porch that wraps around the front. But it's mine. Fully paid off. No mortgage, no landlord, no one who can tell me to leave. Every morning I wake up before sunrise. I make a pot of coffee, the good kind now, not the cheap stuff I used to buy, and I sit on that porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I watch the sun come up over the water, turning the sky pink and gold and orange. The lake is so still in those early hours that it looks like glass. Some mornings I see deer coming down to drink. Sometimes there are ducks. Once I saw a bald eagle. I just sat there with my coffee getting cold, watching that magnificent bird soar over the water. And I thought about Victor. About how he would have loved this, how he would have sketched it, tried to capture that moment of grace and freedom. I cry sometimes, sitting on that porch. The grief sneaks up on me when I least expect it. I'll see something. A man who walks like Victor did. Or I'll hear a song he used to love, and suddenly I'm drowning again. The loss hits me like a wave, and all I can do is let it wash over me until it passes. But here's the difference now. I don't stay underwater. I come back up, I breathe, I keep going. Because Victor gave me something more than money. He gave me the chance to live again. Really live. Not just survive, not just work myself to exhaustion, but actually live with purpose and peace. 6 months after the will reading, after all the legal paperwork was finalized and the house and accounts were officially in my name, I sat down with Harold and asked him to help me set something up. I created a scholarship fund in Victor's name. The Victor Alexander Memorial Scholarship for Architecture Students. Every year it gives one student a full ride to college, tuition, room and board, books, supplies, everything they need. Everything Victor needed when he was young. Everything I had to struggle to provide. I funded it with $200,000 from the trust Victor left me. Harold helped me set it up so it would generate enough interest to be sustainable for decades. Maybe longer. The first recipient was a young woman named Maria. She was 19, first-generation college student, working 2 jobs to try to save money for school. When we told her she'd won the scholarship, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. She just stood there in Harold's office, sobbing while her mother held her and kept saying, "Gracias a Dios, gracias a Dios." I meet every scholarship recipient, every single one. I invite them to my house by the lake, and we sit on my porch, and I tell them about Victor, about his dreams, about his talent, about the kind of man he was before Dorothy broke him. I tell them that this scholarship isn't charity. It's not pity. It's investment. It's belief. It's me telling them what someone once told Victor: you are worth it. Your dreams matter, your future is valuable. Last month I met this year's recipient, a young man named James. He was tall and quiet and reminded me so much of Victor at that age that I had to excuse myself to cry in the bathroom for a few minutes. When I came back out, James was looking at the photos I have on my mantle. Pictures of Victor as a boy, as a teenager, at his college graduation, at his first day of work. James said, he looked happy. I said he was. For most of his life, he was. James asked me if it was hard, giving away so much money when I could have kept it all for myself. I told him the truth. This money was never mine. It was Victor's. And Victor would have wanted it to go to someone like you, someone who reminds me why sacrifice is worth it. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of a mother's love and a son's devotion, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, stories about real love, real sacrifice, and real redemption, need to be told. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. Giving Victor that $40,000, working those 3 jobs, selling my wedding ring, sacrificing my own dreams so he could have his. I don't. Not for a single second. That money gave Victor a dream. It gave him hope. It gave him a chance at a life he wouldn't have had otherwise. Yes, Dorothy tried to steal it. Yes, she tried to erase me from his story, but she failed. Because Victor gave it all back to me. Not because he owed me, not because he felt guilty, but because he loved me. Because he understood that the greatest gift you can give someone is security, dignity, and peace. Dorothy called me a parasite. She said I was irrelevant, that I had no value, that I'd wasted my life being a martyr. She was wrong about everything. I wasn't a parasite, I was a mother. And there's nothing parasitic about loving your child so much that you'd give up everything to see them thrive. I wasn't irrelevant. My love shaped every good thing about Victor. My sacrifice gave him opportunities. My example taught him kindness and generosity, and the difference between taking and giving. And I wasn't a martyr. Martyrs suffer for nothing. They throw themselves on swords for causes that don't matter. I sacrificed for something that mattered more than anything else in the world. My son's future. Victor made sure the world knew that. He made sure Dorothy knew it. He made sure I knew it, even when I'd forgotten it myself. The house by the lake is quiet. Sometimes too quiet. I miss the sound of Victor's voice. I miss his laugh. I miss the way he'd call me every Sunday, just to check in, just to hear how I was doing. But I'm not lonely. I have the scholarship students who visit. I have neighbors who bring me fresh vegetables from their gardens. I have Harold, who stops by once a month for coffee and to update me on the fund. I have a life that's small and simple and entirely my own. Some mornings when the light hits the lake just right, I swear I can feel Victor there with me. Not in a supernatural way, I'm not that kind of person. But in the way you feel the presence of someone you love deeply. In the warmth of the sun. In the peace of the silence. In the knowledge that you are loved, and that love doesn't die just because the person does. I'm 70 years old. I worked 3 jobs for 11 years. I sold everything I had. I gave away my life savings. I was betrayed, humiliated, and kicked out of my own son's house on the day we buried him. And you know what? I'd do it all again. Every single part of it. Because that's what love is. Dorothy never understood that. She thought love was about what you could get, what you could take, what you could accumulate and control. But love is about what you're willing to give. What you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to endure so that someone else can thrive. Victor understood that. He learned it from watching me, and when it mattered most, when I had nothing left, he gave it all back. Not as payment, not as debt, but as love. Here's my question for you, and I really want to know, what's something you sacrificed for someone you love, and would you do it again? Share your story in the comments, because I think we all have a Victor story. We all have someone we'd give everything for. I sit on my porch now, in this house that's finally truly mine, and I don't feel like I lost anything. I feel like I won. Because I raised a son who loved me enough to protect me from beyond the grave. I survived betrayal and came out stronger. I turned pain into purpose with that scholarship fund. And every morning when I watch that sunrise over the lake, I whisper, "Thank you, Victor. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for valuing me. Thank you for making sure I knew I mattered." Dorothy took a lot from me, but she couldn't take what mattered most. She couldn't take the love between a mother and son. And that, in the end, is everything. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.